Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 34, Section 5. We're going to wrap up talking about the Middle East. In the year 2000, the Second Intifada began, and Palestinian youths were joined by the Palestinian Security Force. These individuals were also joined by Hamas. Hamas is, for the most part, is considered to be a terroristic organization, but now is dabbling in politics a little bit in Palestine. But they sent suicide bombers into Israel to attack citizens. Um, you know, individuals who literally had explosives wired to them would get on buses and such. Part of that was because Israel had sent troops into parts of the West Bank and Gaza, and thus we've got warfare happening. In 2004, Yasser Arafat died, and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon decided to withdraw Israeli troops from Gaza and parts of the West Bank. In 2006, Hamas, which many countries thought was a terroristic group, won control of the Palestinian parliament, thus kind of legitimizing their existence. After Arafat's death, Mahmoud Abbas, a moderate member of the Fatah, replaced him. And in 2005, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. In January of 2006, members of Hamas, the Palestinian Resistance Movement, um, rejects Israel's right to exist, and they won a majority of seats in parliament. Abbas continued to remain president, but Hamas controlled the parliament. In 2007, Hamas took control of Gaza, and Abbas dissolved the government as a form of protest. All right, moving back to Iran. In 2009, following the re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, hundreds of thousands of Iranians protested the outcome of this election, and they declared it a fraud. As a result, the government kind of cracked down on these protesters, and there was a violent oppression of these protesters by the Iranian military. And all of this was captured on cell phones and posted onto social media on the internet. But needless to say, um, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is no longer in power, uh, but he's still out there. He's still a force kind of in the background of Iranian politics. In 2015, uh, Iran signed the nuclear deal. It was signed between Iran, the US, the United Kingdom, Russia, France, China, and Germany. And under this agreement, Iran agreed to limit its nuclear development and to accept the increased oversight by the International Committee. Well, fast forward to 2016, this whole deal kind of goes down the tube. Um, Obviously, Iran was not very happy when Donald Trump became president. And so it has left to be seen whether or not Iran will consider renegotiating this deal. But Iran, since that period of time, has dabbled with uranium, and there's some concern that maybe they might try to put this nuclear program back into works. So it's unfinished business here. Beginning in December of 2010, we had an immense uprising, uh, rocked North Africa and led to a lot of regime changes in places like Tunisia and Egypt, and really throughout parts of the Middle East. But this event was known as the Arab Spring. Started in 2010, kind of went through 2011, but um, many Middle Eastern nations saw protesters, individuals who were wanting to have more freedom, more democratic controls within their governments. In Egypt, the oppressive oppressive regime of Hosni Mubarak was toppled. And as a result, protests were organized basically via the social networking. Uh, the Egyptian army sided with the protesters, and thus Mubarak was forced to leave the country. He eventually is going to be placed under arrest, and since 2011, he has passed away. In Libya, protesters rebelled against the authoritarian regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi had been kind of a thorn in the side of really the United States for a long time. Matter of fact, dating back to the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, um, he had certainly had sided with terrorists and hijackers back in the day. But there was an event in 1988 that really kind of pegged Gaddafi as a real tyrant. And that was the fact that he had helped fund and support a bombing of a commercial airliner out of leaving out of Heathrow Airport in London. Pan Am, this Pan Am flight, um, basically was flying over Scotland when the plane blew up, and it was because of supposedly an explosive that was put into basically what would be the equivalent of what they call a Walkman, which is like a portable cassette recorder. But needless to say, there were a lot of Americans on this flight, and obviously the U.S. government was not happy with Gaddafi, and certainly we did some attacks against him. But needless to say, he stayed in power for a long time until about 2010. Gaddafi's troops began to use force against protesters who were upset with Gaddafi, and eventually the United Nations Security Council voted to authorize a military action. As a result, in March of 2011, American and Europeans began airstrikes against Gaddafi. And by October of 2011, Gaddafi was killed. And this led to the creation of a brand new Libyan government. But he certainly was a real jerk, by all means. This is a guy that the United States had been kind of after for a long time. In 2011, violence also erupted in Syria against President Bashar al Assad. Uh, he responded with a brutal crackdown on his people, especially those who were in opposition to him, and that led Syria into a full rebellion. Major rebel groups included the Free Syrian Army, who controlled pockets of territory in the north and west, and the military group known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, aka ISIL, or you might know them better as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, aka ISIS. Anyway, uh, with a little bit of assistance from Vladimir Putin, Bashar al Assad has been able to remain in power even today, but he is considered to be a real tyrant in the Middle East. Thank you very much.